Hi, Trusty Herd. Thank you for joining us. I'm Dr. Tim Thayne, the founder of Trusty and the author of Not by Chance, and this is the Not by Chance podcast. Here we spotlight the latest innovations in adolescent treatment and talk about principles that help empower parents right in their own home. You're going to hear success stories, real-world examples, and our goal is to help you be intentional as a parent because good things in the family are not by chance. In today's episode, From Powerless to Powerful, Influencing Change Inside Your Family, I have my wife and partner here, Roxanne. We're going to be sharing with you some ideas of how to move from that feeling of helplessness and ineffectiveness to someone that's making a big difference inside your family. So thanks for joining us, and Roxanne, thanks for being here with me.
You're welcome. This is an exciting topic because I think everybody feels this. No matter how on the ball you are or how on the ball your kids are, you find days where you feel like you are not making a difference. You are not changing things for the better. So I think that this is going to be a popular episode.
Mm-hmm. You know, when I think about the idea of powerlessness that we feel as parents, that comes from a chronic or a long-term experience with a teen, let's say, where we feel like we've tried everything and nothing seems to work. And in fact, in a lot of cases, we start to feel like it's actually getting worse. So the more we work at it, the more we try, sometimes it actually seems to be getting worse. And what we wanted to do today is help highlight some true principles that can help us actually move from that place where we really don't know what to do and we're reaching out for help to a situation where we're making a difference. I want you to imagine that you as a parent are the captain on a ship in a storm. And you're sitting there and unsure of what to do. Your children are maybe the crew, and they have no idea. They're just kind of looking to you for, well, how do we do this? Or maybe in this metaphor, your child is the ship being tossed to and fro. And that's a pretty helpless feeling if you don't have knowledge and skills and don't recognize the tools at your disposal as a captain. And so I think we've all been there. Roxanne, can you think of in your life, in our life as parents, we've been there before.
Yeah, this world is a very distracting, high-pressure, dangerous place. And I know that in every era of the world's history, there has been danger. But this seems to be very different because the danger can be inside our own home. It's very difficult to protect our children from the pressures and the bullying and the kinds of things that can happen through the internet. And so I think that those storms are real. And when we think about waves crashing and being seasick and not being able to see land, where are we even going? What's the vision? It's very difficult for families. And so I just want to make sure that parents feel validated that this is not an easy time. It's a very different time. And our parents' advice and grandparents' advice it's hard to apply it to what we're experiencing today.
It is. And if we're focused on the waves and the storm itself and how little control we have over the winds, we're going to feel very powerless. But I want to share with everyone that there's a lot of research out there that points to the power of family, the power of the leaders in the family. And there was a study done in the National Institute on Drug Abuse. They found that family-based approaches to interventions reduced relapse rates by 30% compared to individual approaches or individual therapy. So you think about that. Now, why would involving the family, and I would say most importantly, the parents, the leaders of that family, in the process of drug treatment, then they're not the ones taking the drugs or struggling. Why would that have such a powerful effect on the individuals got the addiction? What are your thoughts about that, Roxanne?
Well, first of all, I think that the parents are the most powerful influencers in a child's life because they have the history, they have the relationship, even if it's been bruised a little bit over these last few months or years as the child's been developing maturity-wise or developing an addiction. the parents care the most, and they will be there long term. They are the most invested, meaning they want to see where their children's lives go. They want to do anything they can. When you have sacrificed from the day that child's come into your home until this point, it's hard to just throw that out the window.
Yeah, that's an ingredient that makes them incredibly powerful, really. If they're willing to be empowered, they've got the care.
Yeah, right.
Having the caring in the beginning is an essential ingredient of being powerful here. But let's think about the family that's got a child or a young adult that's got a drug addiction. Now, you can only imagine what the history here is inside the family system and how much effort the parents have put in to try and help their child, and how many times they've failed at it. And if it gets to the point where there's needing real treatment, you know that they have felt powerless. But it's that very family, those families, that when they are brought into the process themselves, what happens that actually creates this change? What I would say it is that as they gain knowledge, what happens is they're able to actually apply true principles instead of the knee-jerk reactions that they may do otherwise. Now they're putting intentionality into how they're doing things like communicating, like holding boundaries, like resolving issues, creating, maybe it's even monitoring in a different way, or trusting more, whatever it is that comes from an awareness of both their teens' needs and mental health, but also now some true principles that they can now apply.
I love that you say that. We were at dinner just a couple of weeks ago with one of our college friends whose son is, I think, coming out his 9th time in an addiction recovery program. And I was just thinking, as you were mentioning all of these different things that can change, it's this 80-20 principle, or even 10% that we talk about all the time. If you could change things by 10% in your thinking, or in holding the boundary, or communicating better, or whatever it is, it will ripple, it will grow, and your influence matters.
I think one of the first things that's got to change is the belief a person has that they actually could have an influence. Because we get stuck mentally in a place where we feel powerless. We actually really truly believe that. And if that's the case, we're not going to actually do anything different other than do what comes natural in a powerless state. And what comes natural in a powerless state is that emotions carry the whole process. So whatever emotions we're feeling in that moment is going to have huge effect.
Can I just mention something here? One of my favorite books is by Dan Pink, and I can't think of the title at the moment, but he talks about 2 very important ingredients in marketing and sales. And I think this applies very much to parenting. And that is that you need grit and buoyancy. And I think that at different times and with different situations, we will depend on one characteristic or another more. When we are down, we need to bring it back up. When we are tired, we need to apply the grit and just keep going. And so I think that as you're listening to some of the things that Tim's going to share today, I think if you can also write down those 2 things, and maybe write some examples of times you've shown grit in your life, whether it was in family life or not, it can still be applied in the home. And also buoyancy. Where have you had times where you've shown buoyancy, or who do you rely on to help lift your spirits? And that can be powerful too.
Mm-hmm. As we were driving down here for this podcast, I was sitting there next to my son in the car, and I started thinking back on, literal faces of parents that I've worked with that have been in this powerless place where they just don't know what to do. And in some cases, you really do need a third party to come in and just give you a little boost and maybe a little structure, or a little hand-holding as you do something different from the status quo to kind of get that empowerment started. And I told him, I said, in some of those cases, I literally am standing, behind the parent as they're having a conversation with their son or daughter, and I'm whispering in their ear because what I'm telling them is not what comes natural. But they're coachable. So they're kind of in this place of saying, I am ready to do something different. I don't know what to do. I'm going to let you actually guide me in this situation. And it's I just so many times, because I have such confidence in certain principles, that's going to free the system up. That's going to free the parent up to be able to really have the influence they need. That I think they draw from my confidence, or another person in any situation. You may have to draw from someone else's confidence as you get those. Like a new colt trying to stand up for the first time, and you have to kind of going to be a little bit wobbly. You may need a little support on that.
I was picturing actually rappelling, and when you have a guide who has a rope hooked to you and they're guiding you, and you're not going to fall, but you are feeling a little bit nervous, a little bit unsure, because you feel like you are stepping off a cliff to do something different. You're like, how is this going to work out?
Yeah, it was just the other day I was facilitating a conversation between a young adult and his parents, and all of them had gone down the same road so many times around the same topic that none of them had confidence that this conversation would go well. But I had ultimate confidence. And so they said, well, we're going to trust that you can help us have a different outcome. And I had no doubt, no doubt. And what it comes down to is the consistent application of a true principle. And as we do that, we have a different outcome. And so sure enough, at the end of our hour-long session, there was a lot of smiling faces because they had a different outcome. Now, what happens in families is that we can get stuck in these emotional kind of dynamics between us and a child, or between us and our co-parent. And it's so compelling, this cycle, that it's very hard to get out of, because we really believe we're doing the best we can, we're doing the right thing, and the other person feels the same way, but it's taking us in the wrong direction. And so it's sometimes takes a jolt to the system to stop the old patterns and begin something new. I had an experience as a brand new trainee as a marriage and family therapist at Brigham Young University. One of my professors, when you're first starting to learn how to do therapy, it's scary, and you almost feel like you're going to ruin everybody that comes through the door. You're going to make their life worse instead of better. And so you're really nervous about that. And especially if you're going to actually work with an entire family system, because that's complicated. I mean, there's not just the individual's issues, but it's their issues, their relationships between each other, how their issues impact the relationship, and all the different dynamics that happen inside that. It just gets more complicated. And everybody that has more than one child, they know, or even just one, every new person that's added to the family system compounds the complexity of that. So you ask, why would focusing on the family actually help if it's so complicated? Can't you just kind of separate it all and just take the one and work with that individual on their issues? Well, I was so grateful for this professor, because she said, it is complicated. She says, but what you want to do when you get in front of the whole family is you are looking for the customer for change, because that person is poised and ready to do something different. And system theories shows us and tells us that in a tight system like a family, and they're all emotionally connected to each other, when one person makes a change, it ripples through the entire family system. So you don't have to help all of them change. Sometimes you just have to help one. And so that's what I'm always doing when I'm working with the family. I'm looking for that customer for change. And I get excited when I find them and let them know that's who they are. And basically, they are powerful because they are ready to change. Let's use a little metaphor here, Roxanne. I've used the greenhouse metaphor before, but if you've got a plant in a greenhouse, and let's say the greenhouse is the parenting domain, and let's say that the plant is the teenager that's struggling. Now, you can't force that plant to grow, but what you can do is you can set up the conditions for optimum growth. And that's the person in the greenhouse. There's got to be the right amount of water. There's got to be the good soil, the nutrition, the light. And we know what those factors are in a greenhouse. And so someone with that knowledge can apply that and set up the conditions for growth. The same is true for a parent in a family system. If you understand what are the elements to create change in the environment, you can begin to set up the conditions for change. We always have said that change begins with you. The parent is the most powerful agent of change because they're in that leadership role. They've got influence anyway, and they're looking for answers and solutions. And so you are really ready, you're poised to be that customer for change to begin the ripple through the family. Now let's talk about some specifics about this. We've seen over the years, many parents who will catch onto an idea, one thing. Let's say they struggle with emotional management. And every time a certain topic comes up, the nonverbals they get from their teenager, the eye rolling, maybe the F-bombs or whatever it is that they're getting, triggers them into an emotional kind of reaction, and things go south. So let's say they caught on to this one principle that if I can stay calm, if I literally can just stay calm, and that's managing myself, not worrying about whether I'm getting what I want from this other person that I'm talking to, my child, kind of disconnect ourselves from what we get back and just think about my job right now as a parent, as a leader, is to remain calm and remain open and keep listening. Just that one thing. That immediately begins to change the entire dynamic of that conversation. And we've definitely seen many, many cases where parents have said, okay, I know that's my weakness, whatever the weakness is. I'm going to spend 2 weeks making that the thing that I'm going to do really, really well at. And what that has done in many cases is changed the tone of the entire relationship.
I actually talked about this in our parent group recently in our Trusty training. I was telling about a December one year where I decided to give up raising my voice. And I'm not a crazy woman when it comes to yelling at the kids, but my voice gets intense. And I decided for the whole month I was giving that up for a gift to the family. And there was a change. I think the family all lowered their volume as well, but it was exciting to me, especially, to feel like I could make that decision and I had control and I could do it for a month. And if I could do it for a month, I could do it for longer. And that just feels, this word is so overused, but empowering.
Mm-hmm. So let's break down the steps there. You must have learned some principle that, not raising my voice and manage my emotions would potentially make a difference. You had a belief that that's true. And then you said you made a decision.
Yeah, this is Prochaska's model of change. I moved through those without knowing what the different stages of change were. But I made that decision that this was a gift I was giving the family.
And you followed through.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so the consistent application of that after you'd made the decision. Now, that's the thing I think we sometimes forget, especially if we're in the ship and we think it's going to sink and we're going down. We really don't remember that all we have to do is make a decision. And that commitment and decision is the beginning, it's the ignition to the entire change process that's going to unfold inside the family. So I just ask everybody out there listening to the podcast today, think about your situation. What's the smallest change you can make that would make a difference if you were consistent and you followed through on it over a couple weeks' time? And whatever's hitting you right now, I'd like you to write it down and see if you're really ready to commit to that and watch it unfold. I love, as a family systems thinker, to know that there's someone out there that, irrespective of what their family's going through, of what the response they're going to get from their family members, that if they make a change, I'd love to be a fly on the wall, and you'd start to see you'd start to see some differences that end up compounding. So instead of the spiraling down, you get the stop, the downward spiral, and then the beginning of this unwinding of this this negative spiral loop that they've been in. I've seen it happen many, many times. I'd like to use a metaphor here. You brought up rappelling and climbing and things like that. So think of yourself as the person on the rope, and your child or your teen is the one rappelling or climbing a cliff. For some of us, our natural instinct is to try and rescue. And what we might do in that position is pull on the rope. What that does is it keeps our child from being able to find their own footholds and handholds, which is what they ultimately need to do because they need to be able to climb that cliff. On the other hand, you shouldn't totally let go. So it's this unique situation where you're the belayer. You're not a helicopter kind of lifting them and putting them up on top of the hill. You are a belayer, letting them under their own strength find their way up the cliff, and you're there to help support them and keep them from falling. And there's lots of emotions that might get in the way of our job there, because if we see them struggle, if we, any of those things might trigger our rescue response instead of being a leader to help them and empower them. Parents, since college, my passion has been to help families thrive. For decades after, my team and I delivered the premier in-home aftercare, but it could be costly, and too many families were left without support. That's why we created Trusty, a unique blend of proven curriculum, personalized coaching, and intuitive technology. Starting at just $129 a month, you can access tools and expertise to get and keep your family on track at a fraction of what we used to have to charge. Like we always say, help things go right before they can go wrong. Visit Trusty.com, spelled with 2 Y's, to learn more and subscribe today. Murray Bowen's differentiation of self is a really powerful concept. It basically is that parents who remain calm and connected, the true principles inside families as a leader, are less likely to escalate conflict and more likely to foster self-regulation in their teens.
You say that again.
So basically, if you as a parent are self-regulating and calm, and you stay connected to your teen, you're modeling that for them, and you're going to keep from creating conflict. And at the same time, your teen is going to be much more likely to become self-regulated themselves. So now they're learning from our example instead of just what we're telling them to do. So it's real another truth there. At Trusty, we're obviously the core of the whole app, and everything we're trying to do is really to create greater trust inside the family system. And as parents, I've been grappling with, okay, we have an assessment where the parents can assess their trust in their teen, but to have mutual trust both ways is really the ultimate goal. Because teens who trust their parents, a study was done, teens who feel trusted by their parents are 65% less likely to engage in risky behaviors. So you want to set up the conditions now to gain more trust with your teen. So let's say you had a teenager that was taking the car without asking and staying out late at night. As a leader in the family, there's a lot of things you could do. You could get really angry and take away the car privileges. Or you could think about, okay, I need to manage my emotions. I also need to address this issue. And so you sit down and have a conversation with your son and say, well, we've got to do something about this. This is not working. And so I'm going to give you a couple choices. Either we take the car away this week, or if you want to take it out tonight, you need to call me every hour on the hour and let me know where you're at. And always ask me for the car before you leave. So in this case, the son decides that he wants option B. He wants to go out that night, use the car, and for the very first time, he calls in and checks in every hour on the dot. So what's happened here? The conditions were set up so that the teen could listen, could hear the options, there wasn't resistance, made a choice, and ultimately followed through really well with that. And the trust between him and the parent grew.
I have to point out that would take a lot of pre-contemplation on the parent's side to prepare for that conversation. Because if you are just standing right there in the kitchen and you got both guns blazing, you're not going to be doing that kind of good work as a parent.
Yeah, there's a lot going on with that parent. They're thinking ahead. They're like, what's my vision for this relationship with my teen? How would I like my relationship to be, unfold and be in 6 months from now? Well, I want it to be a strong, connected, trusting relationship. All right, what I do in this moment could go against that vision, or it could really further that vision. And so I'm going to be really thoughtful about some other things. I'm going to make sure I manage my emotions. I am going to address the problem. That's part of leadership as a parent. And I would like to give him choice and create accountability for that choice. So several principles are coming into play here. And he set up the conditions for the teen to succeed or fail, but it was up to the teen, right? And in this case, the trust was grown. Awesome stuff. Now, this could have been obviously gone the other direction and more powerlessness on the part of the parent.
What would you call the very first moment of pre-contemplation or pause or scheduling a time to talk about this? What is that? Because that's the beginning of picturing the vision and leaning into that. What do you call that moment where you separate from the heat of everything to recall that?
I think what you're asking about for me, what came to mind is that it's the moment of truth, where we kind of stop trying to control out there and decide that we're going to change ourselves and that we play a part in this dynamic. We play a part in what's happened in the past and what's currently happening. And I have enough knowledge now and self-awareness now to do something different. So it feels like the moment of truth, where we're taking really power in the knowledge that change does begin with me. I wish everyone could take a few marriage and family therapy courses, almost like you were going to be a therapist, because it exposes you to this idea of systems thinking. And instead of the usual way of thinking, which might be there's a cause and effect, and there's someone that should be blamed, there's someone that's causing the problems, and you have to address that problem, you start to think about it in terms of what are we creating together, and the power of one individual to actually change the system itself. In my doctoral program, I had a neat opportunity to apply family systems thinking to organizations, businesses, healthcare system actually in this case. And really what it is it's a large human system that has a lot of interesting dynamics that if you boil it down, it comes down to dyadic relationships, the individual challenges, their personalities, but them in relationship with all the people around them. And so I had this really cool opportunity to kind of intervene in a large system. And what I found is as I exposed these principles to different leaders, there were some of them that just caught on fire. They were, when you think about Prochaska's model of change, they were ready for change. And those individuals began to apply these principles inside their workplace. They started to apply them inside their families. And I had the neat opportunity of helping them in their family system, but also with their direct reports in the work environment. And it was one of the funnest things I've ever done, because I was watching the system principles being applied, in all these environments. After a few months of this, my mentor there, he said, "Tim, I have never seen an intervention actually change a large organization like this without years and years of effort, like 1/4 of the budget put towards it and everything else. How did this happen?" And I didn't really understand it myself, but as I look back on it, there were a lot of people in that organization that were ready to change. The system was in pain. There was a lot of there was a lot of acquisitions going on. This large company was buying up all these regional hospitals. There was reorganization happening, so roles were being shifted. New people were being brought in to now manage teams, and departments were being changed, and so there was this upheaval in the system, and there was a lot of pain. Well, if you are in pain in your family system, you're probably much more ready to adopt some of these true principles that's going to help you really make a difference. And that's what happened. I think what was so exciting to me about that is I was in the middle of all this, and I got to be the system shifter. That was a kind of a empowering kind of feeling that I had. And that's the opportunity you have as a parent, is to be a system shifter. And it starts with just you making those changes yourself and then watching it ripple through your family.
So one example that we have of a mother who became a system shifter for her family was a mom who had 2 teenagers, and she decided to institute family meetings. She created a Sunday night family meeting, and at first there was a lot of eye rolling and flopping on the couch and not looking and not participating, but she stayed consistent. She wanted to apply this because she knew good communication and consistent communication would lead to great outcomes. And it did take a few weeks, but pretty soon they started to open up. They started to talk about friend drama. They started to talk about things that they wanted, like an extended curfew on special occasions. And that would never have happened had she not made the decision to become this system shifter and change the communication style that they had in their home. That she got very intentional about that. She was not by chance in how this was going to play out in her family. And I was so proud of her for that. You know, I had a personal experience with this, and I hope I can do it without being too emotional. But I don't even remember what happened with my father. But I was angry at him as a teenager. I was in junior high, and I got a note in my class that said, "Your dad will be picking you up after school." Well, my dad was a busy professor, and that never happened. So that was a big shift, and I was sweating it. And he came and he got me, and he took me to Burger King for a shake. And we just talked about everything, you know, and I was just really unsure what's going on here. And then he said, "You know, sometimes things happen and it's right under your nose and you don't recognize it." He says, "But you've been unhappy with me and you've been stonewalling me, giving me the cold shoulder. And I just want you to know we don't do the cold shoulder in our family. So I want you to talk to me about it." And again, I don't remember what happened. That was 40-something years ago. But it was such a huge change, such a huge shift. And to this day, I'm emotional because it showed love. And that's what I want to encourage you, that you might think it's not making a difference. But what you're doing will be something they will think on 40 years from now.
I'm so glad you shared that story. It's one of my favorite stories of your dad and your relationship. And I appreciate you bringing up the love part, because that's always going to be an ingredient to success. Whatever principle you might be, trying to apply, that nurturing and love is always got to be a part of it in order for it to be powerful. I believe that parents have the ability and the right to actually receive inspiration on what to shift. If you're in tune with your kids, if you got your finger on the pulse of what's going on, and you're gaining knowledge and understanding of tools at your disposal, or methods like this family meeting, for example, or some communication principles or emotional management principles, or whatever it might be, you've got this toolbox of understanding now. I believe that if you will really think about it and ponder and pray even, and ask, what should I apply now? What should I do now? That you'll know what to do, because every family is different. A lot of parents will, who have a teen coming back from a treatment program, they want to get a hold of somebody else's plan. They want, Sally's had success with her transition plan, so I'd like to take that and use it for my family. And what I'm finding as I've interviewed parents about this is that these plans vary significantly. There are true principles in there, but they vary a lot because the plan needs to be based on your strengths, your resources, your inspiration, your readiness to change. And so you can take the true principles, but There's going to be some that are more important than others. There's going to be a first step for you that might be different than a first step for a different parent. And so I really believe that that can happen. Sometimes you may need to talk to someone and explore the different options, and then it will come to you. But I just ask you to take that first step now, because that is the first step to actually truly feeling that you actually can be the most powerful influence for change. You can go from powerless to powerful as you begin to take these steps, and then you have the hope behind it. Now you've got actual evidence of change, and that just fuels you for the next stage. Parents, if you found this helpful to you, I hope you will subscribe and share it with your friends. Also, I want to encourage you to go to Trusty.com. There on the website, you'll learn about our coaching services, our app itself, and the curriculum that we have to share with you.